Hi there, thanks again for joining us for another episode in the Covid School Miniseries brought to you by the Renaissance podcast with myself, James Willets, and Margaret Allen. Once you've listened to the episode, if you did enjoy it, please do leave a comment. Please do like and share on your various social media platforms. Any shares or likes would be much appreciated. So please do enjoy the episode.
Good morning, everybody, and we are here again in our separate houses because we're during this COVID lockdown. We have Nicola and Roshan and my colleague James, and we're going to talk about all things books and reading and libraries. Maybe I'll ask Nicola to introduce herself. Good morning, Nicola.
Margaret. Nice to be here. I'm Nicola Cowling. I'm based with Babcock School Library Service in Devon, and I'm one of the advisors. I've mostly been in that role for over 30 years now, and I'm fortunate to be part of the Babcock Education Service, which provides sort of school improvement support services to schools, not just in Devon, but across the country. And so we have that kind of network as well as the traditional schools library service role.
Thank you, Nicola. Very, very interesting. And I've been down to visit you a couple of times, so I've seen that an amazing plant. And Roshan, hello.
Hi. So I'm Roshan Hunt. I am the head of library at Fernhill School in Letchworth. That's North Hertfordshire. We're a small secondary school, but prior to that, I've worked in lots of different kind of libraries. I'm a chartered librarian. I've started in media, and I went on to work in law firms. So a real range of library services.
Yeah, very varied. It's nice to hear people's journeys. And we're all on the same journey at the moment, aren't we? Coping with the disadvantages and some of the barriers that COVID is offering us by way of encouraging children to read and getting them to still open books and to engage with text. And maybe I'll start with Nicola, the challenges of COVID from where you're sitting. What would you like to share?
Challenges have been different along the way. So first lockdown to later lockdowns. So the first lockdown was very much teachers were having to, and librarians were having to react very quickly. They were looking to us as a schools library service for support and advice. So things around publisher permissions, for example. They were looking for where they could access books, in particular for their children who they knew wouldn't have many books at home. I mean, one of the first things lots of our schools did was to dole out huge numbers of books. Some of them almost cleared their libraries to give books to children, both primary and at secondary, to take home so that they had books, not knowing how long that situation was going to last. Obviously, with this lockdown, it's been different, although everything happened in a horrible rush and was very fraught for people. But they're trying to juggle book provision for actually large numbers of children in schools as well as large numbers of children at home. And I think that's really challenging for both primary schools and secondary schools. Some of our secondary schools, a couple of the librarians were on their bike delivering books out to pupil premium children, for example. So it was schools library service on wheels.
Interesting concept.
Absolutely. As well as for us, we were frantically trying to pull together sort of e-book resources. So like yourselves in the first lockdown, you made Myon freely available, or a version of it freely available. Some of the publishers like Collins Big Cat, Bug Club were making things available because we had so many children at home who would normally be swapping books daily in their process of learning to read, which is a huge challenge for the primary schools.
So, Roshan, you're in a secondary environment, and children are children. I like to call them children, whether they're in primary or secondary. But mostly children in secondary are going to be reading longer books and maybe having a slightly different approach to their choices. How's it been for you sitting in your position at Fernhill?
So this lockdown feels so different. So this is a third lockdown, but really, as far as schools goes, it's the second lockdown really, because this is the time when schools are closed. It feels so different because first time around it was all about getting so much any content out there, but now this time around we're just so much more aware of how it is for the student and how much screen time they're having. So we're evaluating our timetables, and it's more about quality really. So it's not just about lots of different things for them to see on Zoom. What we do need to do is make sure that our communications are targeted, make sure that they're really on point, they're really strong, and that time that a student spends in front of a machine is really valuable. The first time round there was a lot of goodwill, there was lots of gratis offerings around from the book world. So you had, like you say, My On free. So during the year we've really done our research to make sure that we've got the right ebook provision for our school, and every school is different. So what's been quite good is some providers have waived their platform charges, so you can really just focus on the books that you choose to buy in an electronic format. So that's working quite well for us at the moment. But really, it just feels so different, and it's the not knowing, and it's just such an important time. When we think about reading, we think about the benefits for empathy. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. What more of an important time to increase empathy and understanding, and to not be able to provide fiction in a way that we would have done, previously, is really challenging. So we need to. It's really hard, but we need to, to get that space on that timetable, which is a logistical nightmare for any school. But we're still putting it out there, but we're understanding how students are learning differently from home. And yeah, it's a challenge, and every school's approach is different. But the one thing I keep hearing is from librarians is we don't know the year sevens. That's a really common thing to hear, and that just feels so wrong. So we don't want to lose them. So that's where we're at the moment.
And actually, we did a webinar last week that focused just on that sort of catch up between 6 and 7, and that lack of awareness of the transition that would have normally gone on, particularly with book choices and that emotional engagement that you've just reflected or talked about. What do you do about that, Nicola? How are you advising schools? What do you do by way of support?
Well, it was interesting to, talking about the transition issue in particular, because normally our secondary school librarians would have been working with their primary schools. Either sometimes they visit them, but certainly the children would be going up and having a session in the library under normal circumstances. So schools were being quite innovative amongst our Devon schools that I've spoken to, and we're trying to put together sort of virtual transition booklets, for example. So as a school's library service, what we did was put together a template, if you like, with different things in it, different sections in it, that schools could then brand and fit in their own information about their librarian, opening hours, all those sorts of things. Or because it was modular, they could just lift bits out of it and put into anything they wanted to do themselves. So they were trying to get that feeling over. Some schools, one of our librarians, probably more than one, but the Exmouth Community College, Louise Burrows, the librarian there, filmed herself doing a welcome and introduction to the library and a tour of the library and showing the different sections. Another school had a couple of their year 7 students. They filmed them. Obviously, they were key worker children at the time. They filmed them. They filmed themselves, to be honest. It was part of the whole process. Introducing the next year 6s to the library and sharing some books they'd particularly enjoyed and what had excited them about when they'd got there, which was largely, I have to say, due to big manga and graphic novel sections, which was great. And that, I think, worked really well. So any good good practice or anything like that people were doing, we were sharing. I mean, it's very much, one of the roles of schools library services is sharing the good practice that people are doing. We're librarians, we're magpies, that's kind of what we do.
Yes.
Teachers, actually. So
very much the hub. So we've mentioned authors a couple of times, and obviously they're key to reading. Where would we be without authors? So celebrity authors, and I think there are a lot around, and I'm sure we've all got opinions about which should be celebrity and which shouldn't, but maybe we won't go down that route today. Roshan, in terms of advising people and supporting people and getting children to make good choices with authors in mind, what have you got to say about that?
See, that's really interesting, because I've always been of the view that all reading is good and you shouldn't have this kind of snootiness or snobbery and it will lead to something else. But there was this article in The Guardian in December and it said, well, does it actually lead to something else? I thought, that's a really interesting question, because I've just always assumed it would. But now when I think about my experience in several years in two very different schools, does it? So when you think about a celebrity author, we know that probably the one that comes to mind, I'll say he who shall not be named, has spent more weeks at #1 in book charts than J.K. Rowling. But I think we know that when you think about the text of those books, it doesn't have the kind of richness of language that something like J.K.'s work does. So, but then one of the things that I read in that article from The Guardian that really stuck with me is it said that if you throw lots of money at any book, it will become a success. And I thought, oh my goodness, and how frustrating is that for up and coming authors that aren't established names to not be able to get their work out there because the money's gone to someone else. That must be really, really difficult. And libraries being closed now, and we're going to be thinking about Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow. And I was looking at my list of the books that every year, the fiction books, John Boyce, Striped Pyjamas, and all the books that we recommend every year. And there's a new one this year, Karen David, called What We're Scared Of. And it's about how anti-Semitism has manifested itself in this school in South London. And it's about, when you want to keep your collection up to date and keep it current and talk about new authors, it's not necessarily a known name that you want to plug. And I think that's what's a real shame at the moment with libraries being either closed or having a click and collect service, is you're losing that browsing ability. And browsing is such an important information retrieval skill. And for our young people to not be able to do that at the moment is just heartbreaking, because we know the research shows that when students start secondary school, reading takes a dive. So this is when we need to get them in, and we can't do that at the moment. So it's a real killer. It's really frustrating. We're going to have to work really hard when things are over to kind of, make up for that lost time.
And it's interesting that question comes up from teachers time and time again about, we're doing this topic, or can anybody give me some advice about this? And I often suggest AR Bookfind, actually. I know it's not the best of everything, but it does give you nearly 40,000 titles, which at least gives people a chance to start thinking about filtering and being succinct about their choices, and not necessarily going for the books that are on display in Sainsbury's or Waterstones, where money maybe has been thrown at it. Nicola, what would you like to say around that sort of topic?
I think like Roshan, the article was fascinating, and I think supermarkets with their one shelf of celebrity authors account for 16% of the children's books sold. So that's really narrowing down the range of books which children are accessing, because if one of the key things is children by themselves, secondary is slightly different, but they don't have a lot of autonomy in terms of what they are purchasing, because they don't have much purchasing power. It's down to parents, and family often will purchase either books they knew as a child or books that are in the press. So the celebrity author thing is a big issue. I mean, I do definitely think celebrity authors can lead on to other reading, but it's up to us as librarians and professionals to lead them on to those books. So, for example, as a schools library service, we put together where next book lists, so that if you like David Walliams, where you might go. If you like Beast Quest or Daisy Meadows, we've converted those into bookmarks that are up on our website so that schools can just download those and give out or give to parents at parents' evenings. But there's also, if you don't have a local schools library service, there are great people out there. The wonderful Scott Evans, whose blogs as the Reader Teacher and on Twitter is at Mr. E Primary, has created this absolutely fabulous range of what he calls book match resources. They're done as ready-made A4 posters, and he's covered the celebrity authors. So if you like David Walliams, sorry I said the name, and but also people like Christopher Edge or Emma Carroll. There's 40 of them there. They're a fabulous resource, so I would encourage anyone to look at those. And also Books for Topics have created 15 what they call branching out lists. So they take from a starting point, so let's say Liz Pycon's Tom Gates, and then spread out in terms of what other authors children might like. So there are great resources out there that you can access if for people that don't have that, huge bookstock knowledge at their disposal and are looking for that sort of help.
And certainly parents would come into that category, because I know that, parents choosing books and grandparents choosing books for their grandchildren. It's having that resource knowledge. And so people that you've cited, Matt Tobin, I often use as an example, the senior lecturer at Oxford Brookes, and he's done this amazing Padlet, which I think he uses his teacher trainees to populate. And it's finding that resource so that they make the right choices on the child's behalf.
Hi there, hope you're enjoying the episode. Just a quick message from Renaissance Learning UK. Did you know that MyOn by Renaissance, the online digital library of over 5,000 books, can be accessed on any device at school or home for every pupil? MyOn offers pupils interactive digital books with a read aloud feature, and all books are linked to accelerated reader quizzes. MyOn also allows teachers to set one-time homework assignments or long-term projects which they can track remotely. For more information on MyOn by Renaissance, visit our website, renlearn.co.uk.
I recently had the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Sarah McGowan, who helped write the Reading Enjoyment Guide for us. And her research was very much around talking. She's been speaking to secondary children and asking why they don't read so much. And it's about, well, actually, nobody helps us so much anymore. When we're at primary, we have books in our classroom and we can make choices and we talk to, but we have to read longer books as well, and we don't always want to do that. So, Roshan, yes, what can you say on that?
Just following up on that point, I think with the celebrity also, I think some of our students lack the stamina to even get to the end of one of those kinds of books. And I think that's where our role is really valuable, in that we can, week by week, set targets, help them progress through the book. And then at the end of the book, that's when AR is really important to us, because they can take that quiz and we can say, were they just reading it or did they really understand what it's about? And then we can say, okay, we like that, so let's move you on to something a bit more highbrow. But it's really interesting about who these books are aimed at, because it's the parents with the purchasing power. But my daughter, who is in year 7 now, she read all the Harry Potters, but she hasn't got to the end of one of the David Walliams ones. And I think that's because it says some of the cultural references or the pop culture references within the books are aimed at the grown-ups. Sometimes I just don't think they're aimed at the children. It goes over their heads, or they're not streetwise enough to get them. So I think it's quite interesting that it's who they're aimed at, and they're a bit like the confectionery by the tills, aren't they? The sort of impulse buys.
Yes.
But if you pick up one of those things by the tills, it doesn't mean you're going to pop back and buy a pineapple. No. But you need to be guided, don't you, through that, and be told, well, actually, it'll be healthier, or it'll stretch you if you come back and pick up something else.
Sorry, go on, Nicola.
I was just going to say, in response to what Roshan was saying about some of the children, still struggling to get through that length of a book, it was interesting that when the National Literacy Trust did their research, it's their annual research that they do, but they also looked at the differences lockdown had made. One of the positives that came out of it was that boys in particular had responded positively to audiobooks, and had said that it had engaged them more and increased their interest in reading for pleasure, and also actually in terms of their interest in literacy. So it was the one fact which was showing that it made a difference with boys. So I do think that audiobooks side is definitely worth exploring for educators and librarians.
I think that's right. And I think also I spoke to someone from the National Literacy Trust recently, and they were doing a study about reading in general, and the sort of almost the snobbish factor about whether an audiobook is really reading, and actually what is reading. Because if you ask anybody what did they read last, they'll always rack their brains for a book that they read. They don't think about the menu or the newspaper or the website. And so we need to recognise that if children are reading anything, we should be grateful, because they're engaging with text. And yes, there are different levels and different values. Roshan, what would you say to that?
And I think this is a time where teenagers really find out what kind of reader they are, whether it's that dystopian fiction they like, or it's the nitty-gritty books of reality where they see themselves represented. And again, because they're not having that browsing experience, it's really hard for them to know. And I know for me, I remember leaving primary school being a really strong reader. We didn't have something like accelerated reader in those days. I remember sitting in my head teacher's office and, reading a text, and he said, yes, you've got a reading age 13 and above. And I remember thinking, I'm August born. I was 10 years old at that point, and I remember being really baffled by this. But I didn't become a reader, I don't think, until year 7. And that was because I had access to books that interested me. And so that in my reading journey, that was really important. And with, public libraries and the restricted hours now, and, they're probably closed at the moment. It's just so hard for a young person to really, love reading if you don't have access to that kind of material easily. We've got to make it so easy and take those barriers away. So to a certain extent, those books in the supermarket are an easy way of getting, a book into a child's hands. And also, I think you need to think about how different families as well, value. Like, I know my family really valued education and books, but not fiction so much. And I don't think we knew that much about the benefits of reading fiction as opposed to non-fiction. My family were always really interested in current affairs and books for studying and respecting that and that time for books, but not so much on the fiction. I really hope that we can kind of, make sure that's something that isn't lost as time goes on through a pandemic.
Roshan, what's interesting you saying that, because today the Empathy Lab have launched their new book list, and the research has really come out in much more recent times, I think, about the impact that books can have on our mental well-being, but also our capacity for empathy. So that sort of research of the value of reading fiction, and it is specifically fiction, because it effectively, if you engage in a good narrative and you are taken along with the main character and what's happening to them, by the end of it, it's showing that our brains, it's like we've gone through that experience ourselves. And so it is literally moulding our brains in a particular way. And I think that research is all relatively new. So I would agree with you. My family experience was very much about, well, you read non-fiction, you read facts, you read something that's going to be useful to you. Later on, fortunately, I had other people like a good local librarian who was influencing you with fiction. But it's absolutely fascinating, and I'd encourage anyone who hasn't explored the Empathy Lab website, and it's got the research behind that, to have a look. And the book lists, they've got 40 or 50 books on there, covering from sort of foundation right the way through secondary. It's some great titles on there, and very explicit why they're interesting books and why you might want to explore them.
And I think that emotional attachment and that engagement is absolutely crucial, because, foisting a book onto somebody, we've all seen the children who've got a book in their bag, which they think they should be reading, and they get it out every time and put it back every time. And that's why I do think that the whole quizzing aspect, although there are those people who feel that children should be reading without a quiz, if it gets children onto that ladder, onto that platform whereby they're engaging and they're wanting to get through the book so they can do the quiz, then we should be applauding it, not naysaying it, because hopefully that love will come through. That naturally sort of takes us into that glorious event which happens each year, and I'm sure it's going to be slightly different this year, is World Book Day. And, again, there are all sorts of facets of that day, from, they only ever dress up as heroes, and it's nothing to do with books. That's the worst. But the best is giving it a day to talk about it. Who'd like to start?
Certainly, we've been looking at it as a schools library service, because we're mindful that it's going to be very different. Well, almost certainly. I know we don't know the lockdown is going to continue, but I think our gut feelings are that it may well be. So we were looking for some sort of competition that we could run that would mean children could engage at home or at work. So we've come up with the Great Toilet Roll Challenge. So basically, to design a toilet roll, to illustrate it as a book character, or that represents your favourite book in some way, and for schools to run their own competition and then send their winning entries through to us as Schools Library Service, and then we can have winning entries in Key Stage 1, Year 3, 4, Year 5, 6, and secondary as well, and for staff as well, because actually World Book Day is for everybody. But I noticed on Twitter, definitely people are starting to think about it and trying to scrabble together ideas for what they can do. I think Dean Boddington, who tweets us at Mr. Bod, was starting to pull together last night. I noticed some ideas. So do sort of watch that space. But people like, I noticed Reading Zone are offering a competition, which I think they probably do annually anyway, but is to create your own picture book. And they're suggesting that would be an interesting activity during for World Book Day, or around that time, whether you were at home or in school.
Roshan, how about you?
Okay, so my idea, and I've completely plagiarised this from an idea that I saw on Facebook on the Secondary School Librarians group, and I can't remember whose idea it was. I'll have to go back through my social media feed to find out who it was to give them full credit. But basically it says, you wake up on World Book Day in the setting of the book you are currently reading. Where are you? So I'm going to ask staff and students that question, and they're going to come back and tell me where they are. I'm in a pub in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. And I haven't quite thought through how I'm going to present this. I don't know whether I'm going to look at Canva and do some kind of mood board, or whether I'll get staff to video themselves saying where they are. But really, the idea is to say that, look, we're in a pandemic, our movement is restricted, but really our books can take us places. So that's amazing. What I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to start with. But logistically, to do anything else is just so fraught with problems, because I don't want to mess authors around. I already had an author kind of lined up for an online thing, but with timetabling, and we still don't know this side of half term what's going to happen. So, but yeah, that's what I'm going to go with. It's the where are you, and yeah.
That's a lovely link, as you say, during lockdown, to still be able to go places. It reminds me of the Dr. Seuss quote. We are going to be doing our What Kids Are Reading. We don't know exactly when and what format it will take, because it also has some logistical issues around it, because we want to make sure we're gathering the right data and that it reflects what we've always reflected. So watch this space. We haven't finalised that detail, but I thought it was probably pertinent and suitable to mention it, because that obviously comes out at the same time. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear you bouncing between each other from a sort of primary and secondary, but more holistically book perspective. Nicola, if you could say one thing that you're definitely going to do as soon as you can break free after this pandemic. Maybe we'll keep it book related if you can.
Yes, I was just thinking it would be better to be book related. Well, I think obviously what I'm missing as a school library advisor is being out in the schools with the children, actually handling books with them, sharing books with them, and enthusing about books. It's a huge part of what I do ordinarily, and after all this length of time, that's the thing I'm probably the most desperate to do. Even, outside of whether it's personal life and I'm missing my theatre, it's actually, I'm really missing all these fabulous books I'm reading, and I can't share them with any children and young people and teachers.
Sounds like a plan. Roshan?
So when I was at school, my secondary school library was locked, okay? And some of my friend's mum would come in every so often and potter around and have a tidy up. And so the library that I run I want to be completely different to that. So I just can't wait for some normality to welcome them back in, get to know those year sevens. As librarians, we know the name of every single student in the school, because they all have library lessons in Key Stage 3, and we see them progress through the school, and they know it's somewhere that they can come at any time. They know that even if it's not just a library lesson, they can come at break and at lunch. So the first thing to do is kind of get it into a routine. We've got to compete. These young people have so much on. We've got to compete for their time. They have so much entertainment in the palm of their hand and their devices, that to make reading part of their daily routine is really, really hard. So that will be the first thing, to try and get some kind of routine back in place. And just to communicate to them that reading is fun, that's why you do it, but also tell them that's what can really give them the edge.
Yes.
OECD research that tells you that it's the most important indicator of educational success, more so than the car that their parent drives, or the job that they have, or where they live. So that's in the background as well. But really, it's enjoyment. You get something out of it.
Yes, absolutely. I think the only thing I'd add to that, I've got 6 grandchildren, and I'm missing having them on my lap and revisiting some of those books that I see one of them regularly because I look after him. But I have missed revisiting my favourite books with them. So I understand that feeling of, let's get back to normal on so many levels, but sharing a book has to be key to all of that.
Totally.
Thank you so much for your time, passion, enthusiasm, and let's talk again sometime. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you'd like to listen to more episodes in the Covid School Miniseries brought to you by the Renaissance Podcast, then please do subscribe to the podcast platform of which you are listening to this episode. Alternatively, you can follow myself at James Willets, or my colleague Margaret at Margaret C. Allen on Twitter for more updates on upcoming episodes in the Covid School Miniseries. Again, please do leave a comment, share the episode, and like the episode on any social media platform. That will be most kind of you. We look forward to seeing you again. Bye now.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.